I'm gonna copy the create function, and I'm just gonna change the name to update. So let's remove this, and I want to put update. This is gonna return unobservable, and that's gonna be the updated user. Now, the only thing is you have to always double check with the API that you're using so that you understand how to send the request to them. I've already looked at the documentation, so I know how to send this request, but what I'm trying to make you understand is that whenever you're gonna use some API, you don't go off of what you know as far as like how to send a specific request. You have to actually go on the website of that specific API and then read their documentation so that you understand how to send that specific request. So here we're gonna send a put request. So I'm gonna change this to a put. And when you send a put request, you should also pass the body. And another thing you guys can do, if you just put your mouse over this and you press Alt F12, you can look at the definition of that specific function and you can see what you need to pass. So you can see here the put, it takes a generic, which is why we're passing our type of data. And then you can pass in the URL, and then you can see that you pass in the body. So that's how you can see what you need to pass. And we're gonna look at those more. So here you can see that we're passing in that body. Now, the other thing is if we go to the documentation, as you can see here for updating a resource, so you have to pass in the ID of that specific resource. So beside all of the body that you have to pass in with the request, you have to pass in the ID. So let's say that for this user, we're gonna pass in the ID here as part of the URL. So I'm gonna do / and then I'm gonna pass in the ID. So I can do the user and then ID. And like I said before, you always have to check the documentation of the API so that you know how to use it. So now we have the update so that we can update a user. So let's go ahead and use that update. So I'm gonna go back into the app component and I'm gonna scroll down and I'm just gonna copy the create and then paste it down. I'm gonna scroll up a little bit and then I'm gonna call it on update user. And then here I'm gonna pass in the update, so update and pass in the user. Now what I wanna do is, you know that we have to pass in the ID of the user. So let's go ahead and scroll up. And here now I'm gonna create an ID for that specific user. So I'm gonna do ID and then give it some value. So let's say we want to change these, let's say the 5th user. So let's change maybe the name, the email, and let's change something else. Let's go into the company and let's go ahead and change that. Okay, so now that we have this data change, so now whenever we send the request, the 6th user should be different. So let's go back into the browser. Well, we have to call that function first before we forget. So I'm not gonna call the create user, so I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out. But I'm gonna get all the users after I call the update user. So this is supposed to be uppercase, and we're just gonna copy this name. And I wanna make sure I update this before I forget. And let's go ahead and scroll up. And here we want to call that function. So this on update user. I'm gonna save everything and then go back to the browser. And let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and refresh. Okay, and you can see that we have the update user. So there's the first one. So I don't think the user is going to be updated because this is just a fake API. So whenever we fetch all of the users again, as you can see, the name is still the same, but we get the data back. So for the 5th user or the user with ID 5, we were able to change the email, and you can see the company name is different as well. And you can see the name is also different and the username is different. And those are the values that we set. So if we go back and we change this ID, so let's say we want to change this, the last user. So we pass in 10 and let's go ahead and refresh. So you can see the 10th user is Clement, and here we're changing the name to my name. Well, just Junior is my name. But you can see it does the same for this specific user, which is the last user. So in a real backend, whenever we update the data like this, and then we fetch all of the data again down below, this data will be different. So obviously this is not being persisted. And if you read the documentation, it will tell you that the resource is not really updated, but they just fake it as if it was updated. So that's why whenever we fetch the data again here, we'll still see the same data is still there because, you know, this is a fake API and you just use it for testing. But that's how you would update a user using the put method by passing in all of the parameters of that user.